Well, it's an immense honour to welcome the Honourable John Howard OMAC to the first instalment of our Liberal Legacy series. We are incredibly grateful for your time. Mr. Howard, you are our greatest living Australian. The Young Liberal movement appreciates your contribution over so many years as our second longest serving Prime Minister. Your record speaks for itself, in particular with respect to tax reform and for us as university students. Your appeal in voluntary student unionism in giving students the choice as to whether or not they join their student union. We're incredibly grateful for your time, and we recognise that you are the first New South Wales Young Liberal President. So how did that start? How did you become the first?
Well, I was always interested in politics, and way back in 1963, I became the Young Liberal representative on the state executive. That was a position voted for by Young Liberals, and it was the most senior position that you could aspire to. The chairman of the Young Liberal Council then was an appointed person and was not a Young Liberal. There's a bit of a history to that, which I won't bore you with, but the then state executive, particularly advised by the late John Carrick, who was then the state director, decided that as the position was vacant, the previous occupant having decided to retire, resolved that I should be appointed to that position, even though I then held the most senior position available for a Young Liberal himself or herself, and I was. And so I became the chairman, and I continued, of course, to be on the state executive, and that was a very valuable position because it gave you access to the most influential body within the Liberal Party in New South Wales, and of course it brought me into contact with the then leader and later Premier of New South Wales, Bob Askin, Eric Willis, who was the deputy leader, and federal members, and the party president at that time, I think, was Fred Osborne, who had been a minister in the Menzies government and had lost his seat in 1961 when there was a big swing, and we were only saved by the preferences given to us by the Democratic Labor Party. So it was a great experience, and it certainly stimulated my interest in politics.
Fantastic. And what were the issues that motivated the Young Liberal movement?
Well, we were, of course, very consumed by the foreign affairs debates at the time. You've got to remember that at that time, foreign affairs and national security issues dominated people very much. Vietnam War was hotting up. Our involvement, which was taken to a higher plane in 1965 when the then Prime Minister, Bob Menzies, committed an infantry battalion to service in Vietnam. It was a very controversial issue, although as late as 1966, it played a major role in a massive victory by the then Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party, Harold Holt, over the Labor Party, then led by Arthur Caldwell. Over the following 3 years, public opinion would change. And that was a very turbulent, difficult period in Australian politics. And I can remember being very heavily involved in debates at universities and in front of other fora about the wisdom or otherwise of our involvement in Vietnam. And of course, bit by bit, slowly at first, but with considerable speed towards the end, public opinion did change. It was affected by the debate over conscription, Many people took to me what was a fairly contradictory position, said they agreed with us being involved in Vietnam, but they didn't agree with conscription. Well, I felt that if you, as a nation, decided to commit yourself to a cause, then you should be willing to mobilise all of those able to contribute to that cause. Now, conscription has been an issue which has deeply divided Australian society over many years. Way back in World War I, it split the Labor Party, and it was the first of three great splits in the Labor Party. And I can understand why people feel strongly about it. But in those days, of course, politics was very dominated by foreign affairs and defence issues. There was a well-founded suspicion that the Labor Party was not very enthusiastic about the American alliance. And the left wing of the Labor Party, which is anything but dead these days, the current Prime Minister regards himself as a child of Labor's left. They were very critical of our involvement in Vietnam, and Arthur Caldwell, who was an interesting person, very committed to what you might call traditional Labor causes, grew up in a trade union environment, the Victorian Public Service, very strongly pacifist, based on a detestation which we all share of war and the misery and personal loss and destruction it involved. But he was not somebody who thought we should be involved in Vietnam. And there are a lot of people like him. Although, when it was all over, the man who many regard as the elder statesman of Southeast Asia, Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, declared that he supported America's involvement in Vietnam. And if America had not committed itself to that cause, communism would have spread far more extensively in the region. Now, it's interesting to recognise that a person such as he, who had a very, how shall I put it, traditional, orthodox, left-wing background, nonetheless could see the virtue in what the Americans, with our help, were doing in Vietnam. There was another issue that dominated domestic debate at the time, and that was the issue of what was called state aid. That was the government giving financial help to non-government schools, principally Catholic schools, because in the 19th century, it's a long time ago now, our country, and particularly in New South Wales, decided that education should be free, compulsory and secular. In other words, we were not as a nation going to support religious schools, and that meant effectively Catholic schools, because Catholics then comprised some 20 to 25% of the population. It's higher now. And of course, they ran schools, still do. And it was a remarkable decision the Catholic Church took to continue to support education.
Without taxpayer funds.
Without any, and their citizens continued, of course, to pay taxes as well as non-Catholics.
Yes.
And of course the reply was, oh, well, you're going to always send your children to government schools. That's true. However, they, as a matter of conscience, felt that education of children should have a religious ambience, and of course the Catholics maintained their school system and probably continued to educate at least 20% of the school-age population for almost 100 years. And of course, as time passed, and particularly in the 1960s, there was a decline in the number of people going into teaching orders in the Catholic Church. That meant that they had to employ at ordinary wage levels people who weren't brothers or priests.
Fascinating.
They were just men and women who taught in good faith in Catholic schools. Now that put an intolerable financial burden, and pressure for state aid increased. And although the overwhelming majority of Catholics at that time tended for socio-economic reasons, not for reasons of theology, to vote Labor, notwithstanding that, and the fact that most state governments in New South Wales, Labor governments, were dominated by people who declared themselves to be Catholic, they wouldn't budge. And the left-wing influence was so strong that attempts to shift failed. Along came Robert Gordon Menzies,
Yes.
who he described himself as a humble Presbyterian. He was a person without any semblance of bigotry or religious discrimination. He thought it a matter of social justice that state aid should be introduced. But he knew it was a hot issue, it aroused great passions, because in those days religious sectarianism between Catholics and Protestants and Catholics and members of the Masonic Lodge was a lot more intense than it would later become. And he decided in the lead up to the 1963 election to break the ice, and he introduced a system of money for all schools for building additional facilities to teach science blocks, and that was the beginning. And he said this would be available to government schools and also to non-government schools, and that was a huge breakthrough. I think it helped bring about a shift in the voting allegiance of the Catholic community. And the Young Liberals then, and I was the president, thought the policy was right and the general movement was right. But there was a lot of opposition. I remember at the time, Bob Askin was very cranky. He rang me up and he complained. He said, "Oh, this is terrible. Young Liberals shouldn't be doing this." I said, leader, he's the leader then, "You've got to understand we believe this." And I had the very strong view that if the Young Liberals were to amount to anything, they had to be willing to argue their corner on difficult issues. Absolutely. And that's what we decided to do. Anyway, we saw Menzies introduce it in the 1963 election, which took place only a week after the terrible assassination of President Kennedy in Dallas on the 22nd of November 1963. And Menzies increased his majority, and there was a very big swing in New South Wales. I think the policy on state aid helped. And that really broke the ice, and as the years went by, of course, the policy was broadened well beyond science blocks.
Yes.
And of course now it's accepted, and rightly so.
Do you recall speaking to any policy motions at Young Liberal Council?
Oh yes, I spoke to lots of them, and many of them surrounded the issues I've just mentioned, domestically on state aid, because it was a hot topic, and also, of course, the debates on Vietnam. And I remember there was a very furious debate after the 1961 election. I wasn't the chairman then, I was just the representative, and I think the president of the Earlwood Young Liberals, the branch I belonged to. And somebody moved a motion condemning Menzies and in effect saying he was to blame for the heavy reverse in 1961. I got up and I defended him. I mean, I suppose when you lose a lot of seats, which he did, and he almost lost the election. If it hadn't been for the faithful flow of Democratic Labor Party preferences to the Liberal Party, particularly in the state of Victoria, we'd have lost the election. We got back with a majority of 1. It was extraordinary, really. And yet we didn't lose a single seat in the state of Victoria. And the reason for that was the split in the Labor Party was greatest and deepest and more painful for them in Victoria than anywhere else in the country. And I remember defending Menzies and saying, well, he may have seen the loss of a lot of seats in the 1961 election, but he had led the Liberal Party for a long time, since 1949, and he had cleverly exploited, in the best use of that term, the splits and divisions in the Labor Party. That was a very vigorous debate, and I was never shy of having a go at any subject. I tried to convert the Young Liberals away from the typecasting of them just being a social club. I mean, nothing wrong with that.
I met my wife there.
Anyway, that's enough. That's recommendation enough. Nothing wrong with that. But you also had to contribute, and I like to believe that I presided over a period in the Young Liberals of where we became a lot more serious about policy development. And not only did we show a willingness to argue our corner on issues like state aid, I remember that in particular, because it was an all-consuming debate at the time. Seems a bit dated now to be talking about it, but it wasn't then. And I think out of that there grew within the party and in the broader community, particularly the party, the Young Liberals are more than just election day fodder or a social club. They were also a vehicle for communicating to the broader party and community what young people thought on issues. And because in those days, you had to be 21 to vote.
Right.
18-year-old voting was introduced by the Whitlam government after it won office in 1972 and was first in play in a by-election in the seat of Parramatta in 1973, and that seat by-election was won by Philip Ruddock.
There you go.
Who later, who of course was a very active and prominent Young Liberal.
Yes, and minister in
and later became a senior and very, very effective minister in my government. So we have seen a lot of people, I think of Philip and others, who've passed through the Young Liberals, some very active, some not so active, and become members of Parliament. So I would always encourage young people to be involved in the Young Liberals. By all means, enjoy the socials. They're part of life, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. But see it as also an integral part of interpreting to the broader party the feelings and passions and interests of young men and women.
You've always been a leader who has stood on principle, and to that point, from your time in the Young Liberals, you were willing to speak to the opposition leader and tell him what you believe to be right. My question then is, have we somewhat sort of lost the art of just taking a position and arguing from first principles?
I think we run the risk as a society, and I don't just address this to Young Liberals in the community, we've lost the art of arguing our corner. The greatest asset you can have in public life is to be an effective advocate. If you can argue your corner, as I put it, argue your point of view effectively, you'll be listened to, and in the end, you'll be followed. And if you're not a good advocate, I don't think you're going to go very far in public life. I've always admired Bob Menzies. I think he was the greatest political orator I've ever heard. Winston Churchill was a different kind of orator from Menzies, and he was an orator for wartime, and he was an incredibly influential and remarkable in the leadership he gave to Great Britain and the rest of the world. But he was a different orator. Menzies' capacity to hold a huge audience in a public hall. You don't get meetings like that now. I'm not saying you should. This is before television. Television came to Australia in 1956.
56.
7 years after Menzies had become Prime Minister. And he really hit his straps long before that, before talkback radio. A medium that I used more than anything else to argue my case as Prime Minister. The great asset it gave me was that I had the opportunity of actually talking to people. Too many people now think that if you produce a few sound bites and a few pithy phrases, that's enough. That's fine. But there are a lot of people out there who actually want to be persuaded either way. Yes. And although sound bites and effective television personality is good, Bob Hawke was very good on television. I think he was the consummate user of the television interviewer that I've seen. But you've got to be able to argue your case. You've got to, first and foremost, you've got to believe in something, and then you've got to be able to argue why you believe in it and why other people should believe in it. If you can do that, you'll go a long way in public. If you can't do that, I wouldn't even start.
Absolutely. I think there's a challenge to young Liberals, and my question to you would be, why should they be willing to put their neck out, perhaps against their peers who may not necessarily share their views?
Well, they should do it because we are a free society. If we have a well-formed view of what we believe Australia should be and where we should go, not only should we work out in our own mind what those approaches might be, but we should also have the capacity to argue them. Now, I'm often asked, what do you believe? And I say, well, on social issues, I'm a conservative. I don't believe in change for change's sake. I think the institutions we have in our society, our parliamentary system, our rule of law, I think the constitutional monarchy is a better system of government than its alternatives. I think we should keep those things. We should recognise that the family is the most stabilising, cohesive unit in our society, and we should do everything we can to sustain the traditional family structure. Now, they might be regarded as conservative attitudes. If they are, then I plead guilty. But on the other hand, I have over the years believed that many of our economic approaches had become fossilised and resistant to change. I mean, for a long time, it's unthinkable now, people of your age.
Yes.
But we had a controlled exchange rate. We didn't float the dollar. It couldn't find its value according to international market sentiment. We had a group of officials advising the rate at which we should buy foreign currency. Now, that's absurd.
That's right.
We had an increasingly outdated and outmoded tax system. We taxed income even more heavily than we do now. And that, of course, resulted after years of trial and error and attempt and failure, the introduction of the goods and services tax by my government, and with tremendous input from Peter Costello, who was a very successful treasurer, we introduced a GST, and that has certainly improved our tax system. It's in need of further reform now, and I hope one way or another we might see it. But we had also at that time, we had a very, very high resort to tariffs. Now, I know President Trump is fond of tariffs. I think he's wrong on tariffs. I do. I think he's very wrong.
Agreed.
And tariffs are bad for employment. They're bad for economic growth. They make goods and services, particularly goods, more expensive than they need be. And they invite people to retaliate and to fight each other through reciprocal tariffs. That's not good for the world economy.
No.
So there are a lot of those things that I felt, and fundamentally, of course, I believe in markets. I think we need a society that encourages people to work hard and to aspire and to realise their life's dreams, and without being told how to behave by the government.
No.
We have far too many regulations in every walk of life.
It's fascinating. You've always used the description social conservative and economic liberal. It's fascinating that we've now reached a time where perhaps in particular the economic liberal component of that description seems to be under threat on the right of politics as a, as you rightly described, growing protectionist element. Do you think those fundamentals are solid for young liberals who are...
Oh, I do, even more so than before. I think we need a world order built on open trade, fair trade, but open trade. I don't think we should succumb to this populist idea that the government should intervene and help companies or movements that are deemed by the government to be good for the country. In the end, if you believe in markets, as I do very passionately, then performance and individual aspiration should determine outcomes and success, not government fiat.
Absolutely. And your time, you rightly identified, was one of great reform, but you mentioned prior to your term as second longest in history as Prime Minister, there were failures.
Oh, I had plenty of failures. You do.
And what would you say to sort of...
Well, I the first time I was opposition leader, I didn't manage the party very well. I believe very much in the broad church theory. There are a range of views on a lot of issues. And within the broad circumference, if I can put it at that, of the Liberal Party, there are people who are going to be more or less committed to a liberal or conservative point of view. And we should be big enough to contain them. I don't have any patience with people in the party saying, oh, our salvation lies in going further to the right or further to the left. Our salvation lies in reasserting the fundamentals that got us won us success in the past. The Liberal Party has been arguably the most successful political party in Australia's history. I won 4 elections, Menzies won 7. Malcolm Fraser won 3. Now, the reasons for those victories were very much to be bound up in the policies we pursued. There were policies that appealed to men and women, appealed to young and old, and they were policies of preserving the institutions that worked, only changing something if that was beneficial, trusting markets and individuals rather than government bureaucrats to decide what people should do. And having an education system, both at a school and a university level, which gave opportunity to all. One of the great things that Bob Menzies did was to reform tertiary education, to open up the vista of a university education for poorer people, something that he doesn't get enough credit for. But he was really the great pioneer of the expansion of tertiary education in Australia, and he deserves a lot of credit for that.
Absolutely. You've said in this interview we shouldn't be afraid to take a position on issues. I think it's safe to say that one of the challenges at the moment has been our reactiveness to certain things like, for example, Labor's hate speech laws. Do you have a view as to how we are able to better make those calls from first principles?
Well, the first principle I have is that all of us are equal, and equality of opportunity rather than ideological dogma should be our mantra. That means that any semblance of anti-Semitism is unacceptable. I mean, all my political life had very close relations with the Australian Jewish community, not for reasons of political advantage but out of personal conviction. I admired the contribution of a small but very committed community to Australia's welfare, of people such John Monash, arguably Australia's greatest Jewish son. Many saw him as the greatest field commander of either side in World War One. I certainly shared that view, yet he was subjected at various times in his life to, so it is said, with discrimination and bigotry. Now, that's unacceptable, but it's also fundamentally averse to the moral basis of our society. We are governed, whether we are churchgoers or not, we are governed by the Judeo-Christian ethic, the values of truthfulness, of fidelity, and treating each other decently. Now, they are Judeo-Christian in their origin. And of course that means that contribution of centuries of Judaism bulk large in the moral framework of our country. Indeed, not only of our country, but in many other countries. So it's very important that we understand where we've come from. And sometimes people forget this. I think in many cases they're not even aware of it.
No, that's right, because they are Australian values.
They're Australian values, and I mean this conditions my approach to migration. I think one of the greatest things that we have achieved as a country is that we have welcomed people from all around the world, and they've all become Australian. I always had trouble with the concept of multiculturalism. I've never met a multicultural man.
No.
I've met plenty of bicultural men and women, but I don't know what a multicultural man is. Yet I keep reading about how we've got to relate to multicultural communities. I'm still trying to find them. If you're saying, we have a very strong Italian community, I understand that. Greek community, Chinese, Vietnamese, of course. But the great thing is most of them came to this country because of who we were, not because of who they might want us to become.
Yes.
They were attracted to the openness and the freedom of this country, and we must honour that quality by maintaining it to the full. So I simply say these terrible events that occurred at Bondi in December of last year, they're a shame on our country, they're a stain on our international reputation. And my observation is that we should have been more energetic, and I mean the current government, should have been more energetic in condemning what happened on the 7th of October 2023 when Hamas attacked Israel and claimed more Jewish lives than any other single event had since the terrible events of the Holocaust.
No, that's
now,
right.
I feel that very strongly, and you can pass laws, but laws don't mould people's hearts.
No, and we should be unafraid of defending
Oh,
just
we
how
should-
beautiful our inheritance
yeah,
is.
Of course we should be.
Yeah,
And we should say where it came from and what it stands for and why we do it. And we have got to do that more frequently. And it's no good seeing it as, I'm afraid the current Prime Minister does, as a political exercise. I mean, his calculation to me after 2023 was, well, what have I got to do in order not to offend too many people? Instead of saying, this is outrageous. If he had rung up Peter Dutton, then the leader of the opposition, and said, Peter, this is terrible, it's above and beyond politics, let's have a joint news conference and condemn it, everybody would have applauded him.
yes.
And that would have had a terrifically beneficial impact on public opinion.
Here we are. It's a shame.
Well, it is a shame, but we've got to say this, we've got to recognise this, and most importantly, as a political movement, we've got to assert it. And when we get back into government, and we'll only get back into government if we're true to the sort of things I've spoken of, we've got to implement it.
One last question, Mr. Howard. Do you have a message to young Liberals, a new member perhaps who's joined?
Oh, my message is, if you're a new member, thank you. I don't take it for granted. And we do live in an age where people don't join anything. We often talk about the ageing membership of the Liberal Party. That's true of the trade union movement. It's true of many churches. It's true of many organisations. As a society, younger people are less enthusiastic about joining up. So I'm very grateful if people choose to join our ranks. Keep faith. The Liberal Party stands for the individual. We think that achieving your life's goals by dedication and hard work is far more important to whether you're a man or woman, an Anglo-Celtic person, a Chinese person, Indian, whatever. That's great. It's important, but it's not anywhere near as important as being part of the Australian achievement. And I use that to describe Australia because it is an achievement. We are one of the longest standing continuous democracies in the world. A lot of Australians don't understand that we pioneered the secret ballot. That women had the vote in our country in advance of most other countries. And the franchise was completely spread to all adults in Australia. Completely spread to all adults in Australia in advance of both the United Kingdom and the United States. That's not understood.
No.
So we've got a lot to boast about. Now we're not perfect, we've got a lot of blemishes. But gee, it is still the best country in the world to live. And if you're joining the Liberal Party now, you're part of a great adventure. Good luck and thank you for choosing us.
And if there's one more thing we can boast about, it is having been served by yourself, Mr. Howard.
Well, you're too kind. No, don't kiss the Blarney Stone on me.
No, it's true. Thank you for everything that you've done.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening. We really appreciate your engagement with these important issues. If you're considering joining the Young Liberal movement, my encouragement to you today is to get involved. There is no better place, as you heard from Mr. Howard, to fight the battle of ideas and to preserve all that we love about this great country than the Young Liberal movement.